Actually, the agenda is not. I was with them.
Well, excellent. We can give real-time updates.
Yes.
Hello and welcome. If everyone could please take their seats, we're about ready to get started. We could still use a Jabber scribe, please. Ulrich has volunteered to be a minutes taker.
Who's that guy sitting next to you, Jim?
We're not started yet, so we're gonna hold off on introductions. No, but seriously, yes, folks are used to seeing me sit up in the room here all by myself, and we have the good fortune this time of having my co-chair here, our co-chair, and the whole working group. Antoine is here in person at this point in this meeting, so I'll let you say hello.
Hi, everyone. No, I realize it's been some time that I wasn't able to come here, but all set now, so you'll see me more often.
There are rumors that there's going to be a Antoine is back party on Thursday.
No comments.
Yeah, so into the microphone, there are rumors of something on Thursday. I actually didn't catch the word that he offered, but I'm gathering it was some kind of bar meeting or something. Anyway, Jabber Scribe. Come on, somebody. Not seeing any hands. Do I have to pick on somebody? Who's sitting close to the mic? Rick's already got a 2 minutes.
I don't have a Jabber client on this machine.
Well, that's an easy way to get out of it. One person, they don't have a Jabber client on the machine. Yeah. How about it, James? You're the next person sitting closest to the mic.
Same thing.
No friendly faces. Okay, yeah, I'll start these while you make sure you set up there. That's a chat in the it goes through the chat. Okay. Second?
Yep.
Okay. Since we're lucky enough to have two of us here this time, this is great. So Antoine's gonna do Jabber Scribe from up here. Sorry, it just took us a minute to make sure we could get all that set up and make all that work. This is the Registration Protocols Extensions Working Group. We have one meeting this week. We got a 2-hour time slot, and we actually have quite a number of things to go through here. I suspect we'll fill up our time slot, and that's a good thing. Good that we're making progress. This is the standard note well. If you haven't read this before, please do. I'm assuming that everyone knows it, but it certainly does need to be at the start of every meeting. Please be well behaved, and anything you say can and will be used against you in the IETF. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your favorite working group chair or other longtime attendee. For our agenda, we're already into our welcome and introductions. Thank you to Antoine as Jabber Scribe.
We just had a volunteer.
Oh, for the Jabber Scribe?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, George. I saw you in the back over there. Excellent. Thank you very much. You might find it convenient to come sit up front so you can get people's names right when you want to talk about who's talking. But or not. It's up to you. But thank you to George for volunteering to do that. And note scribe, Ulrich is going to be our notes taker. We've already done the note well. Document management, we're going to be talking a bit about that along the way here throughout this meeting. We're going to get to talking about milestones, the documents we're working on. So we'll get into that as far as the status of all of our documents. We've actually been quite productive here over the past few months as we rechartered and cleaned up latent work and have made plans for future work to come. So just a quick look here. Well, this is actually a little bit out of date, we just discovered. We have a couple of RFCs that have been published since our last meeting already. So RFC 8495 and 8521. So we got two work items here off of our action list and our milestone list. We used to have 3 documents in the RFC editor queue. Change poll is still in the editor queue, but Antoine just said as we sat down at the table here that the organizational documents have now actually been published. Do you happen to know offhand the RFC numbers? Yep, real-time update. It's okay. And anyway, those have been out the door and they're published.
4783.
No, that can't be right.
No.
Anyway, we can all look it up and we'll have it on the list. And of course, if you look under the documents for the working group on the data tracker, you'll get to see the RFC numbers anyway.
8543.
8543, and I'm guessing 8544 then, or something like that.
Yeah. Yes, and 8544.
Okay. We had submitted for publication the fee extension document, which was a long time coming. We had actually started this document quite some time ago, and it kind of fell into a little bit of standby mode. But then we picked it up and moved it along quite smartly. So that's currently submitted for publication. And we also have the bundling or strict bundling registration document to be submitted as an informational document. We had at one time spun that off in an attempt to see if it could be its own working group. And since there was no general solution to this space, but it was okay with the IETF and the ISG in particular to pull this back and just make it an informational document so that it could be a documented specification for how the folks really wanted to get this particular feature done. So all of that is the good news as far as that's concerned. One last little bit here is we do have one latent milestone on our existing milestone list. And James, do you want to say anything about this? I guess I'll let you speak about this particular document.
Should I go here?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Jim Gold. After we did the poll for the Regext group, it was pretty obvious that this particular extension didn't have much support. I mean, it got my support, it got Scott Hollenbeck's support, and that was it. So in essence, that pretty much showed that there was lack of interest in this particular document. There's lots of items on our queue. So my recommendation is to withdraw this document from the working group. That's it.
And we did set aside a few minutes for discussion, but I'm guessing, as James said, since moving it forward didn't seem to get a whole lot of traction, not clear we're going to get a whole lot of objections to withdrawing it. And that does align with our goals here about future work. We have a set of things we want to work on. And so we'll go through the administrative task of deleting the milestone so that it's off the list, and that opens up that slot so that we actually have our 5 milestones. Okay. Okay, so that's that one. Let me pause here at this point and just see if there's anybody has any questions or comments about existing document status and where we are before we move on to new stuff. And please go ahead.
Yeah, I just say
And
Goshabad Grover, Center for Internet and Society. Goshabad Grover, Center for Internet and Society. Yeah. Thanks, I guess. I mean, the draft is withdrawn. I just say I don't think there was a lack of review. There was a lot of discussion on the list. So just, I don't think that was the cause of withdrawal, right? I mean, I don't know where the statement came from.
Yeah, this is Jim Gould. Yeah, there was plenty of review, but it was clear to get it to the finish line that we needed more interest in the working group to do that. So that's pretty much answers.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. You're right. There was some amount of discussion on the list about, some issues, but there didn't seem to be traction in terms of an implementation and need for it from registries and registrars more broadly. So that's really the particular detail to put in there. So thank you for that. Okay, newly adopted documents. As you will recall, we're actually on slide 11 for folks who are looking at this remotely and maybe just listening now, the new documents, work items. We had in December, we started with our list of potential 21 items, 21 documents that are out there. Not all of those yet have been adopted as working group documents, but they at least were potential working group documents and thus potential milestones and tasks that we want to move forward. And we ran a little poll just to get a sense, to use that as a way to get a sense of the working group and what we're interested in working on and what would be a priority for the working group. And 5 documents, popped up and stood up as the tasks that we want to address. So what we have arranged is for a bit of a presentation and some discussion on each of these documents so that we can bring all the members of the working group up to speed, get some initial reactions, and have some discussion about that. And then our next big agenda item here will be to get into talking about milestones and what to do with the discussion that we have here. So the purpose of these set of presentations and discussions is just to give everyone a sense of the documents and a sense of the issues. We asked each of the authors to bring to the group here what they see as open questions or issues that we need to be talking about here. So this is not about teaching you about these documents. Everyone hopefully has read them and is up to speed. This is focusing on what are the issues that we do need to focus on and have some discussions about. So we'll go through these in order that they are here. And the first one is the federated authentication for RDAP. And is Scott here? Oh, there he is. He's sitting there. Wow. Hard to believe, Scott, you were hiding behind Watson. How is that possible?
I slouch a bit.
Yeah. Let me, and you want to run your own slides? You can. Or you can say next slide and I will click for you. But there you go.
All right, I think I can operate a clicker as well as anybody. Okay, now, so one of the interesting things about this document is it's not exactly a new draft. It's existed since 2015 in individual submission form. I literally started working on this document at about the time that we stopped working on the core RDAP security services draft. We didn't touch on this topic in there, mostly because, remember, we were all getting kind of tired of working on the core specs. Basic and digest forms of authentication seemed like they were good enough for the core spec. Anyway,
we didn't have a good, clear answer at the time either. So it was like, okay, fine, we declare victory, we move on, and I started working on this afterwards. So next. So I know Jim said not a lot of presentation, but I do have a slide or two of introductory material. So if you haven't reviewed the document lately, I would ask you please take a peek. It is about federated authentication, and here by federation I mean we're talking about a system in which there are multiple parties collaborating to provide this particular function. Unlike digest or basic authentication, where you're kind of dealing with a password exchange between a client and a server, this model has more actors involved, right? And there are certain benefits to that type of an interaction, certain drawbacks. It adds a little bit of complexity. But for the operating environment in which we are seeing RDAP being used, it seems to provide some very interesting properties that allow it to scale. Okay? The approach is based on two standards-based technologies, OAuth 2.0, which is work happening right here in the IETF. In fact, I think the OAuth working group is meeting twice this week, once in the session after this one. But also OpenID Connect. Now, if you're not familiar with OpenID Connect, it's not IETF work. It's an industry consortium, right? But the specifications are published. They're freely available. I think the participation in the actual group, though, is kind of pay-per-view. As an industry consortium, you have to become a member in order to participate. So keep that in mind. The technique described in the document leverages a concept of identity providers. As I mentioned before, scale is an issue when you're dealing with basic or digest authentication. As a server operator, my employer is not really interested in having to assign usernames and passwords to millions of people with whom we have no formal business relationship. It becomes a bit of a management nightmare, particularly when you have people who they very conveniently and often forget passwords. And then what they want to do then from there is call a help desk or something. Well, we don't have to do that with this type of a model. But this is where this notion of adding an additional actor into the fray, becomes something to consider. The RDAP operators are the relying parties in this particular scenario. And if you want to know what a relying party is, go read the OpenID Connect specs. All right. In a nutshell, it's the entity that controls access to a protected resource. And it's the entity that is, quote unquote, relying on the services provided by the identity providers, right? And it uses identity and authentication information that comes from these identity providers in order to make authorization and access control decisions for the requestors, right? So the server operator doesn't need to know passwords, right? Doesn't need to know a whole lot about what the person's asking for. There's some trust in the information received from the identity provider, right? But the ultimate decision about, hey, okay, now I've got all this information about the requestor. I have everything I need to know to make an access control decision, right? That's one of the features that we get with this particular model. All right. Now, as I said, this isn't new. And the fact that it's been around for a few years means we actually do have some existing implementations. There are a couple of servers that VeriSign has operated over the course of 3 years, most recently in support of ICANN's GTLD pilot program. But prior to that, we had been doing some experimentation with a couple of CCTLDs that we manage. We did what we call a thin experiment with .cc and .tv. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the technology, we're talking thin registry versus thick registry. A thin registry is one in which the contact information is not maintained at the registry. It's maintained with the sponsoring registrar for a particular domain. In a thick registry, the registry is a repository in which you can find the registrars push the contact information, and so it exists in two places. CC and TV are both thin registries, right? We also stood up a server to implement what we described as a virtual thick implementation. Now, one of the nice features about RDAP being a web service is that when you send a query to some service endpoint, that endpoint doesn't necessarily have to be the place in which all of the data lives. And in a model where you have data distributed among registries and registrars, if you have some type of a proxy in the front end there, when it gets a query, it can simulate a thick registry by pulling the information that it needs from the registry and the contact information that it needs from a registrar, returning a complete response to the client in a way that the client doesn't know that it's dealing with a thin registry. Right? So we demonstrated that concept here. And then as part of ICANN's GTLD pilot program, we actually implemented a thick experiment with the .career top-level domain We also did it with CommonNet, but CommonNet are still thin. So this particular program demonstrated both thick registries and thin registries. We've integrated support for a couple of identity providers that are implementing the concepts in the draft. One was developed by Viagini. Where's Marc Blanchet? I saw him here. He was here. There he is back there. I know Mark did some contract work. I think ICANN actually threw a little bit of money his way to stand up as an identity provider. We integrated support for that into our pilot implementation. Works just great. VeriSign Labs also implemented an identity provider. But as it turns out, because this is standards-based, you can also use standard OAuth, OpenID Connect identity providers provided by companies like Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google. Now, unfortunately, they aren't doing the stuff in the draft. So when you look at things like specialized claims, and I'm talking claims in the OAuth sense here, think of them as identity attributes. The things that are necessary for a server operator to know if they're dealing with a quote-unquote authorized client. Well, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, they know nothing about RDAP, right? So the identities that they manage will return information like email addresses, full names, addresses, ages, whatnot. Interesting, not necessarily helpful in an RDAP context, all right? But because it's standards-based, works out of the box. All we had to do is configure some service endpoints, and you can use, you can sign in with your Gmail identifier if you want. All right, having said all that, though, over the course of time, we found that there are still some things that I'm going to need a little bit of help on in terms of understanding if this approach actually works in our operating environments. The number one bullet point here that is going to drag this out for a while is ongoing policy development work, particularly in an ICANN context. Right? So right now, the document describes a proposal for a set of claims. And again, claims, think of them as like identity attributes. Things that would be necessary for a relying party to make an access control decision based on a query. And so these are things like the purpose of the query, the role of the requestor. In the future, it could be like the legal jurisdiction from which the query is coming. I don't have a good sense yet of whether or not the set of claims that are proposed in the document is complete. Actually, I take that back. I have a very good sense that it's probably not complete and probably not completely accurate, right? And that's because the ICANN policy folks, who are kind of chewing on this subject, haven't gotten to this particular tripping point yet. But it's something they're going to be dealing with in, I want to say relatively short order. Let's just call it soon. Soon is relative in an ICANN context. That could mean months, it could be years, I don't know. But when you look at this part of the document, just know that the claims stuff in particular is definitely still a work in progress. There's also been a bit of a question in my mind about how we deal with non-browser clients. The OpenID Connect and OAuth stuff, if you go sit in the session upstairs, wherever they're going to be, you will get a very strong sense that they are very browser-centric. They think of clients as having easy access to a web browser. And for their part of the world, that works. For RDAP, not so much. Remember, we come from an operating environment in which people are used to using things like command line clients for whois queries. Or imagine that you're developing some type of a custom client. I know Andy Newton's got a client that he's developing. It's not a browser. And so when you have a flow, like an OAuth flow, that expects there to be a browser there so that you can put information in front of a human and collect information from them, it doesn't always work quite like you would expect. And so right now, the document describes something called the OAuth device flow. And again, if you're familiar with what's going on with the OAuth working group, they've got this. They're not actually calling it the device flow anymore. The device authorization flow. Anyway, it just popped out as an RFC very recently, and they changed the name in the process. But strangely enough, even though they claim that this is a flow for UI-limited devices like smart TVs, etc., devices that don't have a browser, they expect that you have access to a second device like a phone that has a browser to make it work. All right? So the document describes two approaches. One is this device flow. Whether it's necessary or not, I don't know. But there's also descriptive text that explains how you can get around doing what you need to do without a browser. And it involves the ability to fetch tokens and store them locally so that when you need to provide them as part of a query, you can include them in your path segments, okay? So that too, that's text worth looking at. Mentioning path segments. I have no idea if what I've got there is complete and correct, for the operating environment in which we're trying to work. I know that what's there works for some definition of works because we've implemented it, we've tested it. But it'd be very helpful to take a look at what's there and get an understanding of, do we have the right path segments? Do we have the right parameters? Are there others that we need? Okay. Next bullet point, the custom claims. Right now, again, the document describes the encoding of these claims in tokens and then being shared, from client to server, by hex encoding the things and stuffing them into the path segment as a query parameter. Okay, that works, but it's not really kosher from the way OAuth does things today. OAuth says that if you look at access tokens, bearer tokens, they are typically pushed in an HTTP authorization header, right? And the identity information, like in this case, the ID token, would be encoded and passed as a query parameter. So I've got a pretty strong suspicion that I'm going to have to get into the document and change the text there that says, do these both as query parameters. I probably got to change it as ID token as query parameter, access token as information, bearer token in the authorization header. So those are the open questions, at least the ones that I'm aware of, and I think that's actually last slide, I do believe. Yep. All right, I'm clicking, nothing's happening, so. All right, so that being the case, any discussion? Adam?
Adam Roach as an individual. I just wanted to point out you're talking about putting parameters on URLs. If you could go read BCP 190 and make certain that what you're proposing is in line with what's described in there, it probably would help prevent problems at IESG evaluation time.
All right, someone please take notes, capture that BCP number so I don't forget it. Thank you.
Wow, this microphone's really tall. Andy Newton. The device flow, is it possible to add that later on? Like not do it now?
If we as a working group decide it's not necessary, of course.
More from a technical perspective, we don't have to do that now because my viewpoint on that is it really complicates things. At the moment, RDAP clients really don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting. I mean, the worst thing they have to do is do a JCard, and device flow overcomplicates things tremendously.
Yeah, and no argument for me. And I have to admit that over the course of the last 4 years, I reached out to the fellows in the OAuth working group more than once, asking for a little bit of cross-area review here. It's like, guys, please make sure that what I'm doing is kosher, because at some point, like to Adam's point, when this goes up for IETF last call or IESG evaluation, one of the worst things that can happen is someone who knows what they're doing looks at this and says, what are you smoking, Hollenbeck? Right? I was like, nothing in particular. I've asked for help before and I've never gotten it. So I'd rather get those surprises early in the process rather than late. But so that's why the device flow is in there right now, because when I went back and talked to those guys, I think I actually cornered them at the Berlin meeting, which was a couple of summers ago, if you're, again, thinking about how long this has been. And they said, well, we're working on this solution that doesn't require access, to a browser for these UI constrained things. Well, the device flow is what they came up with. And so I thought, okay, in the interest of trying to head off that cross-area review question, it's in there for now. But I think we could make a case that it doesn't need to be there because it doesn't work in our particular environment. So thanks, Andy.
If I may, Scott, so Jim Galvin is an individual. The question that comes to my mind in this issue of device flow is there is use cases that are not browser-based, right? So, I mean, we're used to in the who is place of the world, they're doing screen scraping of what they're getting. But I'm thinking, RDAP, falls more into a category of being an API, if you will. And you think of it in those senses, there'll be other kinds of clients. And we know in the ICANN space, there will be other kinds of clients, reputation providers. So I worry about that interaction. And that's the question that comes up in my mind when you bring up device flow. And I'm thinking, well, I want to think more about that and look at this again in more detail. But that, I think, is an issue that we probably have to deal with, even if we don't call it devices.
Right. And for what it's worth, if it's helpful, I actually have an implementation of the device flow that people can play with. And so it's easy to look at the text and say, I really don't quite grok this. If you want to see what it's really like, put your hands on it, touch it, and get a feel for it, just let me know. Send me a mail note afterwards. I can point you to some code that my engineering team developed that implements it.
Yeah, so this is Andy Newton again. I want to talk about the non-browser clients. Being an author of a non-browser client, one of the things I've been thinking about is how authentication would work, and it's probably going to be in a configuration file somewhere. So, the device flow is while it's for non-browser clients, it's also still for interactive sessions. And so a lot of the things we're talking about are not interactive at all. It's automation. Or, in the case of my client, it's not. It is interactive, but it works differently than what you would see with like a smart TV or something like that. So the way I think client implementers would think about this is they would have a configuration file that says, oh, this access token or this API key is for this server or whatnot. And so when they end up hitting that server, they'll just know to go ahead and apply that.
So you're thinking of that even in support of bulk access, for example.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay.
Rick?
Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. Just a point of clarification, something I know that you know, but the rest of the room might not know. When you talk about the ongoing policy development in the ICANN context, that's not necessarily ICANN, the organization, but ICANN as the multi-stakeholder model that does that policy development. So it's not waiting on ICANN org to do that, but it's waiting on the ICANN community to sort that out. Thanks.
Alex Mayo for Nick.at. Coming back to the question of device flow, so I agree with what Andy has said, and I think that there will be an out-of-band process for people who do bulk queries like registrars or whatever, and they're gonna get an access token in whatever way via the registry intranet or something like that, and then they're gonna put it into a config file. And a year later, they're gonna notice it's been expired and replace it. But yeah, and to the point, HTTP headers versus query parameters, I really like that to be in the headers because it doesn't end up in log files.
Yep. Thank you. Hey, Yarmir.
Yarmir Chalir, CZNIC. I recall those discussions around the Berlin meeting with the people from OpenID Connect, and I think that one of the points where we had a problem to get into this at the same point was when we start to talk about the restfulness of RDAP service. That there was the problem. I think that we maybe try to too much insist on to have the restful service, while they may be expected that why not to do it as a service that you can log in and get the session. To have a session and then communicate about a session. And I don't know if this has moved over the time, if we still insist that this must be a sessionless RESTful service or not. Maybe when we will adopt in this point that it will be much easier for implementing these kind of things like authentication and things like this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so line's empty. The last thing I wanted to mention before I sit down, this is not the order in which I intend to bang on these on the mailing list, okay? Can we go back there real quick, Jim? Sorry. Yeah, that first bullet with the stuff on the claims, that's probably going to be the long tail of the discussion, so I'm not looking to start that one up. But the device flow stuff, the path segment stuff, the query parameter, ID token stuff, that's what I want to bang on real first, because I think those are questions we can answer, and so we can make those, deal what we need to do in the deck, or not the deck, in the document really quickly. And then lastly, this concept is being taken up in the ICANN world today. If you're following what's happening with ICANN and the EPDP, you may know that I am part of something called a technical study group that was asked by ICANN's CEO to come up with a proposal for a technical model to implement something that ICANN is calling a unified access model. Google these terms, guys, okay? I'm not going to spend any time explaining it. But I bring this up because this draft is ultimately at the core of the model the TSG is proposing, right? And 2 weeks ago in Kobe, this TSG had an opportunity to present the model to the community for conversation and feedback. And in some ways, I think the good news is the technical parts of our proposal have so far survived first contact with the enemy, right? Most of the comments we got back had nothing to do with the technology. It was more focused on things like, well, where'd your assumptions come from? Where's the policy development going to happen? Stuff like that. So I'm cautiously optimistic that what is here is actually ultimately going to be useful and used, right? So this isn't necessarily work we're just going to be doing and it'll be parked someplace and never see the light of day. So anyway, I look forward to engaging in some conversation with you all. I look forward to your feedback. Thank you very much for the time.
Okay. So Mario is up next. And the next three presentations are actually Mario's. So we'll just let you walk through your slides here. You have to stand on the pink X. And if you want to work your own slides, there you go.
Okay.
Just give me a moment to get that into the right size. There you are.
Hello, everybody. This presentation is about three drafts, namely sorting and paging, partial response, and reverse search. The goal of this presentation is to summarize the basic concepts of each draft and to briefly outline the point of discussions.
You're going backwards. Click the other button. Click the right arrow. There you go.
The first draft defines new parameters for result set counting, sorting, and paging. It defines new extensions in responses as well, and as a consequence, new values for ADAP conformance arrays. And as an alternative to offset pagination, it defines the cursor-based pagination that seems to be most suitable for the management of huge result set. When I say huge, I mean over than 100,000 records. So this is an extract of the response representing the information about the sorting method, the current sorting properties, and the available sorts that the server can implement. These are two different views of the pagination method according to offset and according to cursor based, and the optional information and the recommended information are defined. According to the author's opinion, the discussion point should be the following: which default sorting properties should be defined by this draft to ease the interoperability between client and servers. If sorting and page information should be provided in metadata elements, and if yes, if the working group agrees about the proposed structure, and if these metadata elements should be part of a more general metadata section together, including other contents like rate limits, information about server, request and response, and other metadata. And which pagination method should be defined? Only one or both? I must say that the current implementation of .it public RDAP test server implement both the methods according to the presence of sort information in sorting of the sort query parameters. So I think that my personal opinion is that both the methods can coexist, and we should let other operators to propose their own pagination method according to the user access level, the query itself. So before.
Let's do the documents one at a time. If you want to go back to your,
Yeah.
just go back one slide. And do we have any questions or discussions on this document?
This is Jim Gold from VeriSign. Is it possible that the server could implement paging without sorting? In essence, if paging is a good feature, then sorting may or may not be a good idea.
This is why we describe in the draft two different information in the response. So the paging metadata and the sorting metadata. So you can, in your RDAP server implementation, you can choose to implement both or only sorting or only paging, if you want.
Would there be any way for the server to identify what is supported? Is that something based on the version, or something that would identify the capabilities of the server?
But I think that each server should provide the user with some capabilities. These capabilities can be different. So if you want to probably, if you are able to implement both sorting and paging information, you can. But it's on your own to establish what you want to implement, what capabilities you want to provide with your clients, with your users.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm sorry. This is Jim again. So would it make sense to have separate version identifiers to identify what is in fact supported?
Yes.
I'm not going to get used to this. Andy Newton. So the pagination method, you said only one or both. I'm a little confused here. If we support both, the client, are you saying the servers have to implement both, like must implement both, or they get to decide which one they implement?
The problem is that when you submit a query at the first time, you cannot report your paging parameters. So it is something that the server provides to you when the response is truncated. So you can choose, for example, if you sort for a property that is not mapped on an indexed unique field, for example, like registration date, the cursor-based pagination is not suitable. So you are forced to use offset-based pagination. Instead, if the user don't submit a sort information, a sort parameter, you can use your own your own index, your own primary key to implement the cursor-based pagination.
Okay, so I just want to understand. The interaction model is the client submits the query, and if it can't be satisfied, it gets back an answer and knows then to resubmit it in some form that can be satisfied. That's correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't really have a problem with that, but it sounds like we might want to get into a discussion about how servers can say what their capabilities are, because you wouldn't want an interaction where you're just going back and forth trying to figure something out and just never reaching a result.
Yes,
and I don't know if that's right for this, but that may be something we want to discuss.
The information provided by cursor-based pagination and offset-based pagination are the same, quite the same. So you had to scroll the page just clicking or just to acting on the next page link. That is the same in both pagination methods. So I think that the server is free to decide according to the submitted query, which pagination method is better. Okay, but if you
So one last comment here. We'll let you, Jim, get the last word here. We kind of have to move on to the next document. But
Yeah, that's Jim Gould again. Actually, this is very similar to the registry mapping on the EPP side. In essence, as we have drafts that have multiple options and can be up to server policy of what functions to support, it may make sense to create a query for server capabilities that allow for the server to tell the client what it can do.
Yeah. Honestly, I cannot decide which is the best method because both two methods has pros and cons. So my opinion is that let the ad app operators to implement their own methods according to their skills, according to their information, according to how the information is represented in their own databases. So I think that anyway, it is a question that I submit to the working group to have a feedback, because I can find, as I said before, I can find the pros and cons of each method, of both the methods. So, and these pros and cons should be evaluated. Maybe.
So, Mario, no, I mean, we do need to move on. Rick,
two seconds, very quick. Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. One thing that I would offer, we're talking about differentiated capabilities per server, and how do you interrogate that? The one thing some of these servers will operate under contractual SLAs, and so they might have response time requirements that they needed to hit, and so therefore is there a mechanism to adjust the capabilities dynamically to say that, look, right now I'm really busy, and so I'm not going to do sorting and paging. I'm just going to give you your answer and that sort of thing. So
I think the point that I want to capture in this is you have your last question about which pagination method. I think there are some sub-questions here, right? One sub-question is the interaction between the client and the server and whether they know what you're doing and how they know. And Rick is bringing up the additional subsection of what happens if that changes during the operation. And so there's a question of interaction of it. And so we just need to capture that issue as an additional one.
I think that the client should not need to know the pagination method the server implements. It should only find the link to move to the next page of the result set, basically.
Okay, so let's move on to the next document.
Yes. The second draft is about partial response. The basic idea of this draft is quite simple. Instead of declaring explicitly the data fields to get back, the client declares a name identifying a server predefined set of data fields. So a new parameter has been defined called field set, and free field set have been defined to be required, at least. ID, it contains only the key field. Brief, it contains those elements identifying in RFC 7485 as mostly supported. That means supported by more than 1/3 of contacted with services. And full, it contains all the information the server can provide for a particular object. We must note that the object class name is implicitly included in each field set. That field set should be provided according the user access levels, at least the full field set. Servers may add any service information, any information that any field in the response that does not provide information about the object, but only service information, and implement additional field sets. But servers should also define a default field set. So the client should know, according to the information provided by the server in the response, which is the field set the server has returned in the response, in its response. New properties, a new property has been defined as well, called the submitting metadata. As a consequence, a new ADAP conformance tag in the array. This is an extract of the information provided by the server representing the current field set and the available field set, and the link to request for the other field set. The point of this, the discussion point, according to the author's opinion, should be which field set should be defined by this draft, which response element should they contain, and which ones should be required. We as authors we made the proposal, but we are open to obviously to update this proposal according to the working group opinion. Since relationships exist in ADAP, should we define variants according to whether associated objects are returned or not? Because we can have, according to the fact that we return the associated object or not, a range of different solutions. So we can have, for example, a brief response which does not return any information about the associated objects, or we can have a brief information returning the information about associated object in ID format, and so on. Should the available field set be provided in metadata element? And if yes, if the working group agrees about the proposed structure, and if this metadata element should be included in a more general metadata section.
Okay, so yeah, go back to your issue slide there, and questions on the previous draft? Just go back one slide.
Yeah.
Yes.
As Jim Gold from VeriSign. Yeah, this is falling into a similar category as the prior one, where in essence, if you try to put the policies associated with each one of these kinds of field sets into the draft, in essence, it may not be feasible because the actual servers are going to have what's returned based on policies of the server, what they need to meet. So it may be better to provide a way to define from the client what field set to use, but then allow for the server to inform, similar with when we're talking about the capabilities, what field sets are available and what those field sets mean. So in essence, each server may have different field sets, and the fields that are returned based on those field sets may be different as well. So the client would need to somehow know, and I think it will be a bad path if you try to inject that into the draft, the exact fields.
Yes. So I'll just put myself in the queue while Andy's running up and respond to that too. So Jim Galvin is the individual.
We defined free required field set to in our opinion, is the interoperability between client and servers. So if I define for example, for ID field set, I know that ID is only the key field, and brief is a subset of mostly supported fields. But anyway, you can define all the fields that you want.
Well, put it this way, I think the ID is really simple. That'll just come back with one response. But where there's decisions on the server side, I think it's best to be left out of the draft on what exact fields return. Leave that up to the server policy.
Okay.
Did you?
No, go ahead.
So this is Andy Newton. This is where I kind of disagree with Jim here. I guess both Jims. I think if it's kind of understood what the expectation is in a draft or something like that, or an IANA registry, then that's good enough for the client. Just because server policy may override that is that's always a given. That's always going to be true, regardless of what an RFC says. If server policy says you can't show, phone numbers or whatnot, and the field set includes phone numbers, it's just not gonna happen. But I think the thing is, as long as the client knows what is normally expected, as long as that's a standard somewhere, I think that's good enough.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next document here. We're a little bit behind schedule, so we'll try and keep things going.
The last draft is about reverse search. This draft defines new path segments for the query, and each segment, new path segments use a reverse search pattern. And the reverse search pattern is a JSON object, including two members, a value and a role. A role is a string whose possible values are those details in section 10.2.4 of RFC 7483. I mean, reseller, registrant, technical register, and so on. And the value represent the search pattern to be matched by the corresponding entity property. It can be for the first three paths a string, and for the fourth path a JSON object, because the address is an object itself. These are some examples of the new path segments. And the points to be discussed according to author opinion are basically the following. Which default reverse search should be defined by this draft? Should we opt for a unique path which allows the reverse search on an entity, on any entity detail. And if is the proposed JSON notation considered suitable? If we should model the reverse search without using JSON, but in this case we should evaluate the reverse search query given the possibility to submit complex queries in the future, like the ones shown in the following. The last is a non-technical issue. Is privacy consideration section considered comprehensive, or does it need further amendments? In our opinion, we think that the privacy consideration section is quite complete. So we don't need to add anything else to that section.
Go ahead.
Stefan Bartsmeyer. Sorry, I won't reply to the questions because first I have a big problem with the privacy consideration section. Okay. This possibility is really, really dangerous. There is a lot of potential for instance, harassment, find out all the domains of one person and then take a complete picture of this person. Today, the privacy consideration is just remember that you have to follow the law and follow the relevant law, etc. In my opinion, the privacy consideration section needs also a clear analysis of the risk, not just saying that you must follow the law, because you must always follow the law. It's useless to remind it. And a clear analysis of the risk, and also an explanation of what should be the default policy. I think there is some sentence saying that it must not be enabled by default the public access, but it could be even more restricted than that. So, and before someone asks, yes, I volunteer to propose text.
Yes, we reported in the privacy consideration section what should be hopefully the scenarios for the application of these drafts. So we know that there are some potential risks in the implementation of these capabilities, but we know also that there are some rules outside the scope of RDAP and APP, outside the scope of technical or technical definition that we don't want to deal with. So we know that there are as well a lot of roles, users supported by lawful basis. I mean, registrars that can search their own domains, not the domains sponsored by other registrars. For example, an authority searching for domains or entities. These rules are supported by lawful basis according to GDPR. So they can submit their queries and they can obviously have responses compliant to their lawful basis. Okay, so we don't want to define something that is against the rules of each country. Okay, we don't want to. for example, we in Italy, we have strict rules about privacy. Okay, so when we basically when we thought to these capabilities, we thought to the registrar possibilities to query their own domains, not the domains sponsored by the other. Okay, they are supported by the lawful basis of contract, because the registrant has a contract with the registrar. So the registrar has already has the information about the its own registrant or its own technical contacts and so on. But sometimes it happens that we have to answer some queries coming from the registrant. I want to know what are the domains associated to this registrant. So we give this answer outside the scope of EPP, outside the scope of ADAP. So, for example,
So Mario, since you said, for example, I'm sorry. I mean, we are running now actually late here. So maybe if we can just run through the queue and get all the comments in, we'll give you a chance to give one last reply to everything, and then we'll move on. Stefan, do you want to give a response, or you can, and then we'll just run through the rest, and then you can reply to everyone at once. No? Okay. Thanks.
Anyway, the implementation can be compliant with the rules of each country.
It has to be. So.
Okay.
It should be.
Yeah.
Let's take our 3 comments and questions.
Goshabad Grover, Center for Internet and Society. I completely agree with Stefan, and I'd add that the sort of actionable recommendation that the privacy considerations make can be reflected in the technical details as well. So, for example, the reverse search string, it has the role parameter as well. So, I mean, the privacy consideration says that it is recommended that only specific entities can perform this function. Then the role parameter should also be recommended or required rather than leaving it as optional, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and the second thing is perhaps a point for discussion, maybe now or later, that I'm not personally active at ICANN very much, but I've been told that this is also a very contentious topic at that forum, and I'd like to hear whether people think that how much of that concern is relevant here and in what form this should proceed. Thanks.
Alex may offer 2 short points. One, I think that the privacy consideration section is definitely not sufficient for that protocol, because it's a risky protocol from privacy perspective. And the second one, I would like to really see a single sentence in the document that says it's perfectly fine to implement just a subset of what is specified. Because otherwise, one could get the impression that a compliant server or client, whatever, would need to implement all of the search options that are described in the protocol. So really put one sentence sometimes that says a compliant client may implement only a subset of the
are
options
optional, are not required, obviously. No.
Right.
Andy Newton, speaking as an individual, I would be fine if the working group put a capital must not do this unless the user is authenticated. So.
Yep, that's a good point to capture too. Okay, do you have any closing
Yes,
comments,
I have.
Mario?
Yes, last slide. Due to potential issues due to replacement of G-card. So I think that this topic will be discussed in the following of the session. So I leave it.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Jim Gould. Let me get you your slides here. And Jim, go ahead. And again, you have a lot of slides here with some background information. You can.
I'm gonna. In lieu of time, I'm gonna jump through this. This is pretty much a summarized presentation that I gave at the last IETF, but now that it's a working group document, I thought it was worthwhile to just review the features of this draft if you haven't had an opportunity to review it. First off, there are 3 problems this draft is solving. I'm going to do this real quick. The first is the RFC only supports passwords up to 16 characters. That is a big issue that this extension addresses. The next is to allow the server to provide to the client any server security events that have been identified. There's a slew of them that are identified within this draft, and it's customizable to support others as well. The last one is kind of support returning security events back to the client, is to allow the client to inform the server about like what OS it's on, what language, what SDK is being used to help identify issues. So the first one is around the password length. It's very straightforward. It provides an ability to be able to explicitly specify to use the password or the new password of the extension using a keyword. And then in essence, the server should use the extension password or new password. Very straightforward. The next one is a little bit more complex, but very extensible. But the idea is for the server to allow or to identify security events that can be returned back to the client. Examples is if there's a password expiry policy that's in place, if the client certificate is expiring, those sorts of things. The server can tell the client about it. Here's a list of the types supported within the draft right now. And there's a set of attributes that can be set based on each security event. The other one is the user agent. It's sort of like what a browser will send to the server. Just provide information so that the server can identify potential security issues. So I list out the items that were discussed on the list. Before this draft became a working group document, there was already discussion and items that have been addressed. Specifically, we had discussions around the minimum length of the password. We went with what was in the RFC. There was some syntactical issue with one of the elements. Also, not allowing for passing of an empty element. We added in or modified the security considerations section. The other thing that's not specific to this draft, but to any EPP draft, is to have the namespace EPP scoped. So we did that. Some of the items that were discussed on the list, there have been responses to, so I'd like to learn more about whether or not these are applicable or not. One was discussing supporting other authentication mechanisms. If there's some ideas around whether or not that's needed or not for EPP, that would be great, and whether or not it fits into this draft. The other one was use of this constant, this bracketed login dash security to identify to the server to look into the extension for the password. So if any thoughts on that, that would be great. The last one was associated with the element type of the password itself, which right now is defined using the token type. There was a reference to use the PROCE, I think that's how it's pronounced, PROCE framework. And in reviewing those RFCs, I really didn't see any applicability to EPP passwords. So if there's any idea as far as how that is applicable, that would be great to understand. So in summary, this particular extension solves the 3 problems by extending the login command, login response. And I highly encourage you to review this and provide feedback. If there's any additional issues, I'd be more than happy to discuss them. That's it.
Robert Story, USC ISI. I read the draft this morning, and I came in here with the idea to bring up pretty much the same issue that was just discussed in the last 3 drafts about capabilities, and particularly with the password complexity requirements not met. I'm sure we've all been on web pages where we type in a password and they say, not good enough, but you don't know why. So the ability to enumerate specifically what the requirements are, and even better if the client knows that from the server to be able to enforce it on the client side instead of having to send it back and forth.
Actually, there is a separate draft for that. It's
Okay.
called, of all things, Login Security Policy Extension, which defines exactly what you were looking for. So I encourage you to take a look at that as well.
Hello, this is Martin Casanova from Switch. I have a question about the agent field. This is, I think, free text in the draft.
Which field?
The agent.
Oh, agent, yes, yes.
Where actually the client can put which OS and which technology, for example, Java, he's using. If that should not be more structured to also make it easier for the server to extract this data.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. We may want to look into that.
Stefan Bartmeyer. Of course, this draft is a very good idea. Everyone remembers the attack against a big registrar last year with consequences for the men in the Middle East. But for the advice and security consideration, I'm think because the problem of passwords is a very general problem, not specific to EPP, I would prefer any specific advice to be moved outside of the security consideration and replaced by a pointer to a more general document. I'm sure there are many documents about security. One current advice in security consideration, for instance, is that you must not reduce the length of a password, which doesn't seem right, because if you have a very simple password of 16 characters, replacing it by a password of 15 characters, but with better entropy is a good thing. So instead of redoing the work of password strength analysis, I think we should just point to a good resource.
Okay, if you have any suggestions, I will appreciate it.
That's a good question.
I'll start Googling it now and figure it out, but that would be great.
Okay, so that's good. Thank you very much, Jim, and Mario and Scott for all of these slides here. That brings us to, we're just 5 minutes kind of behind schedule here. Maybe we can pull ourselves up here as we get into this next big discussion. So let's talk about milestone review. So Antoine and I have been talking about this a lot over the last couple of months. As folks know, we did a poll back in December for folks who were active back then, and we had 21 documents on the list, and so we did a poll to get people's idea of what they thought they preferred in terms of what we wanted to work on in the working group. And something interesting happened in that space, and that is that there was some clear, dominance on the RDAP side, as opposed to the registry and registrar option side in terms of work to work on. There was quite a split in documents. I mean, there's probably half the documents were for RDAP, and half the documents that were there were really for registry registrar interactions, sort of on the EPP side. And it was interesting that we ended up with so many documents really being RDAP focused as sort of the priority to work on. And we've been struggling with that. I can tell you that in the background, we have had multiple discussions with a few different people about the fact that all of those registry documents then just kind of get put on the back burner, and what happens, and why are they sitting there, and how are we ever going to get to them if we're not going to do them? So all of this kind of came together last night. The first bullet up there says proposal before the meeting. Because if you were actually reading the agenda before the meeting, we had said in the agenda, the comment in there was that we would put something up to the working group, a week ago, give you a week to sort of look at something in detail about what we could do here. But frankly, we were kind of struggling with what the right way was to approach all of this, and how to deal with the fact that we really do have two work streams. I mean, if you look at our charter as a working group, we have two streams of activity that we in theory are, allowed to deal with and should be dealing with. And so, the question became how to accommodate both streams and how to deal with that with both groups of people and both sets of sensitivities. And it was only last night, honestly, that we got a suggestion from an area director. And probably I'll do a little bit of a side tangent here and point out that our area director is going to change. So I know that we do have Adam in the room here, but we're going to get a new area director, Barry Leba. They're just going to transition the working groups around a bit and do a little bit of restructuring. But they'd gotten an idea about how to deal with this, and he simply had suggested to us that we just have to face the fact that we have two streams here, and it is okay, and in fact a good thing for us to deal with both equally and give both a chance to move forward. In some sense, there's a little bit of overlap in people that are interested in both streams, but there's a set of people interested in one and a set of people interested in the other. So it's possible from a working group point of view, as long as there are people who want to progress the work, to let both sets of work move forward. And so that's really the proposal that we want to put here in front of people. So there needs to be a little bit of a shift in the set of documents that we have that we want to work on. And I see somebody running to the mic, so I'll pause for a moment before I get to my next slide, but go ahead.
George Michelson, APNIC. I have an enormously strong interest in the progression of the RDAP standards, and that does not mean I think the other standards are not important. I think the other standards are vital because they are the basis of business-to-business work that is exceptionally important for the correct operation of an industrial space. It's business, and it has to be properly standardized and it has to be understood. So I'm not trying to say that stuff doesn't matter, but I do feel an incredibly strong focus in my own heart to RDAP. And the document bombing is a reflection of a wider interest emerging from ICANN community that is essentially, we have to get out of WHOIS. And that problem has been a 15 to 20 year problem, and it's reached critical mass. They were in denial. They refused to actually say the answer is RDAP. And this year, they basically said the answer is RDAP, which means eyeballs are on RDAP. Now, if this working group is going to say consciously, we have two streams, I feel we're heading to where DNSOP and V6OP is, which is we need two meetings. Because if you are proposing to conduct two strands of activity in a single time slot, we have already seen from the depth of discussion, it's not going to work. There's too much work for one time slot. You need two.
Okay, thank you. Rick?
Thanks. Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. Good comments from George there. The one thing that I would offer is that a number of things that we're talking about in RDAP right now are not directly related to its initial adoption, but some of the things like searching, sorting, and paging, I think, are more farther-looking things that are going to be important as RDAP gains maturity in the future. Right now, the community has a challenge in just the initial turn-up of RDAP and the initial implementations of this, where the standards that were written a while ago are going to be seeing some of their greatest uptake and increase in implementation that they've seen. And so I think that some of what we're doing in the RDAP is more tactically important. I think others of stuff right now is longer term.
Okay, thanks. Before we go too far down this path, let me respond a little bit to the two comments that have been made. I mean, yes, thank you, George and Rick. I mean, all of that is true. I think it's important. Let me make the following observation about this working group and the way that work can progress. And what I like about this, to some extent, this is about milestone management, which is kind of an administrative task. Nothing prevents the working group from quickly going through documents as quickly as you can. If you're really interested and motivated in the RDAP stuff, then you can only work on so many documents at a time, and so you need to progress those set of documents. And all we're saying here is giving an opportunity to have a milestones which has the other set of documents on it. But again, the success of any particular set of documents is dependent on work party members who want to progress that work and talk it and have that discussion on the mailing list. We'll take the next three people in the queue, and then I'll just jump to my next slide. But let's go through that.
Alex Mayhofer. I think that the two work streams that we have a completely different size of the audience. And the problem is, I mean, look at EPP. EPP is maybe affecting like 1,000 registries these days, and maybe that's 20 backend operators, and maybe, let's say, 20,000 registrars worldwide. Yeah, those are the number of implementations. Yeah, and while RDAP, I would say, in the next coming years, I'm sure that the potential audience for RDAP is at least in the hundreds of millions. Yeah, maybe not directly, but indirectly. And there's going to be a lot more interest on that. So it actually makes sense that we spend our time on the protocol that has the widest and most intense impact on the internet infrastructure as a whole. And I mean, EPP is sort of like a hidden protocol. That's like the protocol that airlines use to travel agencies. Yeah. So yeah, you know, it's hard. And if you say the second point is like quickly going through documents, you know, that speed typically reduces the quality of the output, or tends to. There's the 80-20 rule, but I feel we are there already anyways. Yeah.
Peter Koch-Diening, I like that analogy. If EPP is the protocol that airlines use in talking to travel agents, then obviously RDAP is a protocol that airlines use to transfer the passenger name records to governments. That said, I'm a bit concerned about the high potential of policy laundering that is again in front of the working group in terms of interpreting what is mumbled at ICANN around whether or not RDAP is the solution. Bear in mind that they haven't phrased the question by now. Not picking on you personally, George. That happens everywhere. And combine that with, and I'm echoing Alex, I guess, combining that with the idea to quickly go through these documents without having in-depth review and discussion of the privacy and the policy aspects of these things, that runs a risk, not only for the working group, but for the IETF as a whole. So that is not a nice task for the incoming area director, but maybe a challenging one, and he'll like it. So to that extent, yes, this is a hidden protocol, the EPP one. I would disagree that there's 100 million of consumers for RDAP. It better not be. But the working group needs to have a broader focus. And it should not just be dealt with by that small group of travel agents that talk to the airline. Thank you.
So Andy Newton again. So I want to take George's thought experiment a little bit further. If we're going to have two meetings, maybe we should have two working groups. One of the things, I don't do EPP work, but if I was someone who did, I wouldn't want it to get starved for the RDAP stuff. If we do believe that there's going to be an avalanche of RDAP things going on, then it may make sense to make sure that the EPP work can still get done.
So, yeah, Jim again here, and thinking about all of this, all very good points, and I think that it's interesting to think about what the right way is to manage our work and how to move it forward. I'm personally, as chair, not inclined to two separate working groups, only because, at least in my mind, there's a pretty strong relationship between these two sets of work items. And I feel like, we're going to have two working groups, or we're going to have everybody, the same set of people in both groups to some extent. And I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong there, but that's just something which goes through my mind. I worry that they're pretty well related. Let me just get to the next slide here and make this a little more concrete in terms of what we are going to suggest here. We're going to try to stay focused on at most 5 milestones at a time. Okay, so we need to pick 5 tasks that we're actually committed to producing by a deadline. But I do think it's important that, to the extent there are related documents, that doesn't mean that we can't be talking about other things on the mailing list and other things can't be visible and there. This is really about how do we focus our work, right? I mean, it's just project management. We're all used to that, and that's what we do. So we pick the 5 things that are the most important to us, and we just try to move them along. And so, the specific proposal was to think of this in terms of if we're going to have 5 milestones, maybe we split them up in some way so that we at least allow a path so that there's documents on each side that can be worked on concurrently by a group of people. The obvious, easy split is 2 milestones per stream since we got 5. And then you just have a 5th one that you assign as appropriate. And so, that just sort of, if you follow that sort of easy logic, you end up with something which looks like this in terms of milestone priorities. It turns out the login security is already on the registry registrar side. So all we're talking about doing here is substituting one of these other 2 documents. And this is taken right out of the poll results from December. So we can revisit that if we want to, but those were the next 2 documents. The domain name registration data mapping and the data escrow specification were the next 2 documents out of the poll results from December, and that's why they got there. And the RDAP ones that we had, those are the 3 that we had. If we follow sort of the plan that we're proposing here, then one of these would have to be put and sort of delayed while we focused on 2 of them. 2 of those 3, the partial response, reverse search, and sorting and paging. So we'd have to pick 2 of them to focus on and get one of them done before we focused on that 3rd one, as well as starting to pick through the remaining 15 documents that we had in our backlog here. So, yeah. Any other discussion or comments about any of this? Anybody want to offer something? We resisted. I will tell you that although we had thought before we would, well, somebody, if you want to get up to the mic, that's fine. We resisted putting calendar outputs associated with these things because we figured choosing a deadline for when we want to get them done by is a lot easier than having a discussion about whether this is the proper way to manage the work in the working group. So just looking for some feedback on whether or not splitting these in some way is the right thing. Jim.
This is Jim Gold from VeriSign. Just a comment on the 2 working groups things, if I could, is that based on the individuals here, I think that it would be a shame to split the 2 because I remember when we had the working session before where we were split and it was really difficult to decide on which one of the groups to participate in. But yeah, I would love to be able to see that some of these drafts, especially like the data escrow draft that is used through all over the place, not get done. With some of this other work that's being done for RDAP.
I'm sorry, you said not get done. I think you mean not get delayed?
Not get delayed, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Scott Hollenbeck. Yeah, I mean, I see the possibility of potentially splitting the working group, but, as Jim said, I don't know that I like that option for some reason. Anyway, so a question. Would there be a possibility of expanding beyond the 5 milestones? I mean, if that's there, it may be possible to make progress, on these 2 streams at different paces. And part of the reason I'm asking is, like as I said before, that federated authentication document, it's going to be in the queue for a little while. And not that it's going to be there because of a lack of work. I think in some ways there are going to be some unanswered questions. And so, the editor and the working group either have to admit that we're not going to be able to get it done until we have answers to certain questions, or we have to come up with a mechanism that allows the answers to those questions to be accommodated at a later date. Anyway, so I don't want necessarily that document blocking others just because we have an arbitrary restriction on X number of RDAP documents. So if there is a possibility of perhaps opening up a few more milestones, I'd like to throw that question out there.
So let me make 2 observations, I guess, and take your question on board, but just make 2 observations rather than respond directly. This working group, even over our years of existence, and we spent a couple of years as the EPP extensions working group before we became Regext and sort of combined the 2 and put them together. We tend to operate very much in fits and spurts, ebbs and flows. So there's not a stream of success. We are very much driven by IETF meetings, the deadline there. A lot of working groups do that in the IETF, so we're not special in that regard. But it's important to keep in mind, how work progresses. So there's not just external factors as what Scott is referring to. The federated authentication to really be final about the technical proposal We really are waiting to see what policy framework is going to be out there that we're really trying to solve for and provide a solution to. And, so you're right, that's taking up a milestone slot. So that's one thing. The second observation I would make is, and maybe I'll make this observation and then I'll look through I see that Barry came into the room, and so maybe he can respond to this at some point when it's convenient in the process. I don't think that there's any harm in having working group documents and having them be adopted by the working group, and they're just there, and we don't have a committed milestone for them because we're not ready to make a deadline. So, maybe what the thing to do is we pull back the federated authentication from having a deadline and still keep us with 5 slots, but now we have yet another slot to assign to something. And actually, we should pick items for milestones that we know we can actually commit to when we have a deadline we can meet. Other things can simply be there in our backlog and, under discussion on the mailing list, waiting for when we're ready to commit them to a deadline. And we can sort of evaluate that as we go along in all of this space. Maybe that's the right way to do it. The number of 5 work items goes back. This is the point I didn't make in my first point. The reason why there's only 5 milestones is because having more than that is really just a lot to manage. If you think about this working group, when we converted to being Regext from EPPX, we took on it was 10 or 11 milestones that we put out there, and we spent years just sort of getting that under control and committing. It's tough to focus when you have too many things. So there's strong push, and having talked to multiple area directors over the years to keep that number small. So we have to find a different way inside the working group to manage that 5. And I'm sorry, I talked a lot. We are taking away from our new work item discussion. I just want to call that out. But no, this is an important discussion. I don't want to stop this discussion. This stuff is really important.
I just want to say I agree with what Scott said, and it kind of seems like we're starting out with RDAP already constrained, right? And you addressed a lot of this. I just want to note that I've talked to people who said, "Hey, I would like to do something with RDAP, but I'm not going to take it to the IETF because it's just never going to get done," and that's a real perception. So we do need to address it.
Thank you. George?
George Michelson, AP Nick. I think the privacy stuff is very important, and I don't think it is going to be resolved by having privacy sections included in individual docs. I think we are going to need an overarching doc that says there is a general community expectation, stupid things don't happen, and these are guiding principles. And I don't think we'll be able to close on it in this working group. I think it's going to go way up, because that reverse search function is absolutely vital for law enforcement. It's unavoidable that they are going to say, I need to see every record this stolen account has potentially interfered with because the password was broken. And that collides absolutely head to head with Stefan's point. This is a massive breach of privacy if you routinely allow people to do that kind of reverse search. But the problem is real. Both sides are real. And we will need a document, and we will need upstairs conversations about what we really want to do here. So I think there's going to be a big hole here if we don't tackle privacy in this space, which will then sit as a milestone and clog up the queue.
Right. So that, well, here, go ahead.
I completely agree, George. The question I have is the expertise for doing that in this working group?
Yeah. And one last comment then before Barry sums it up for us here. It tells us what the way we're really supposed to work this. I think that we do actually, the question that we have to ask ourselves about documents that are milestones is you're right. When we have very broad questions that demand a lot of discussion, maybe we can't commit to a milestone yet, and we have to figure out how to have more discussion about it and defer that commitment to closing on it. That's one way to interpret that question about privacy. Maybe it can't be a document that's on our milestone list yet because there are too many open questions at the moment about what we need to get to. So thank you. Over to Barry, please.
This is Barry. So there are a few points here regarding to what Scott said. Well, first, overall, I think it would be a shame to resplit the working group. I will not object to that if that's what the working group decides is the right thing. But I think these guys up front are capable of managing the working group as it is, and we can adjust how that works. They can adjust how that works. I can negotiate with you guys about how many milestones are appropriate. The reason there were limits put on it was to avoid having it open-ended. But there's no magic about 5, and we can decide what the right answer is. You kind of have 3 things. You have a docket, right? Documents that are on this big list of things you're going to be working on at some point. And then you have the ones that you're actively discussing. And then you have the ones that you've committed to a date when you're going to get them done. And, you know, that shifting things around in those other 2 categories can help you work this out. To what George said, I think if that document is really that important to get done, then I think it should be, a milestone should be put on it at some point of we're going to get this done by this time, and we're going to aggressively work on it and get it out of the queue so it doesn't block other documents. The reality is that any working group only has a limited capacity. And I think if we split this working group, you're going to get 2 separate working groups that have less capacity. So I don't think that's going to help the situation. And I think that's all I had to say about it. That let's discuss, the chairs and I, how many milestones you need and how we want to gate things.
Yeah, and so thank you for that, Barry. And we can bring this to the mailing list and figure out if we need a different number because we have different documents. I mean, frankly, at one level, since this then becomes a natural set based on the poll that we had before, we can just tell ourselves, well, heck, 7's the right number. We add 2 more, then we get exactly what we had before, and we give fairness to the registry and registrar options and let them continue to work on things. And that might be the answer. But, you know, people can take some time to think about that. Please say something on the mailing list, or if you want to come talk to us separately and privately, you know, please do. We really are trying to figure out what the best way is to move work forward. And there are competing priorities, I guess, is what it comes down to. This is all just project management in standards development, I suppose. Yeah, so we are well over time here. In theory, we have 35 minutes of presentations allotted, and we're clearly not going to be, we only have 20 minutes left, so we're clearly 15 minutes under time here. But let's move to our new work. Oh yeah, well, I had a blank slide there for draft milestones for that discussion. Only to repeat the comment about not really putting a calendar on things. But okay, so new work. We have 4 items here for new work. And so these are just options for potential documents that we might want to adopt. So this is basically adding to the 21 documents that we had and, you know, maybe having a bigger backlog. But each of these folks, maybe if Tom Harrison is in here somewhere, you want to come up and maybe we can speed this up. This is more of a introduction to some topics, and maybe since we really need to focus on what we know we want to do, unless you have an interest in wanting to move one of these things to on our priority list instead of just onto our backlog, we can save most of the discussion for the mailing list. So go ahead, Tom.
Cool. Thanks. This will only take 5 minutes. Okay, so RDAP mirroring is a protocol for retrieving all of the data from an RDAP server and for keeping that data up to date over time. There are 3 use cases for this work. The first one is when the overhead for querying the remote server is too high. The second one is when the client wants to do some sort of whole data set analysis. And the third one is when the client wants to republish the server's data in its own right. This third one is the important one for APNIC at the moment. We have national IP registries in our region that send us WHOIS data, but they only send us English language WHOIS data because of limitations in our WHOIS server. If we can switch to using RDAP, then they can send us English and local language. We can serve that from our server, and that makes it more useful for clients in our region. The protocol defines 3 file formats. The first one is the update notification file. This is the entry point for a client, and it in turn contains links to a snapshot and a series of Delta files. The snapshot contains all of the data from the server as at the time of generation, and the deltas contain the changes that have happened since the snapshot was generated. So walking through this from the client's perspective, the client fetches the update notification file. You can see here that there's just a snapshot, so the client fetches the snapshot, takes the objects out of it, sets its local state up accordingly. Later on, something else causes some updates to happen to the server, and the server generates a Delta file. So when the client comes back, it sees that Delta file, fetches it, and updates its local state. The way the client keeps track of where it's up to is by using the serial number. So when it initialized, it got a serial number of 1, and when it comes back, it's looking for everything from 2 onwards. So, yep. Some miscellaneous stuff. It's possible to define a default set of response attributes, and that saves having to repeat common stuff like terms and conditions in each object. Other RDAP objects can be referred to by an identifier. So that's along similar lines. It's about saving repeating data in the objects. And the server can specify a refresh rate to manage load or to indicate to a client how often it expects updates to happen. We have use cases in the numbers context. We're interested to see if domain name operators, if those use cases are the same or if they have other use cases. There was a comment on the list this morning about the privacy considerations needing to be expanded, which is a good point, so we'll do that. We're conscious of the whole milestone discussion, so we're not looking for adoption just yet, but any review and feedback would be appreciated. Thanks.
Okay, if we can keep it to 1 question or 2, that'd be good.
Stefan Bartmeyer. I'm the one who has the issue about privacy consideration, because unlike RPKI that you mentioned a lot, this one is much more sensitive data. But I have another question. Is there someone who expressed some interest about this idea? Because I'm not convinced by the use case, and in my case, for domain name registry, I'm certain that our legal department would refuse flat out to export the RDAP, complete bulk RDAP data to outside. So are there people who are ready to export the entire database?
Well, we have national registries who already give us their data in WHOIS format. So if we can get that form, so that's pretty much it. Yeah, like that's the immediate use case. We also do some export stuff to clients who are willing to sign an acceptable use policy agreement. So we could also use that in that case as well.
George Michelson. It is not actually necessarily strictly true that what is exported is one-to-one the same as what is in the prime service. So in our current WHOIS mirroring, we explicitly exclude certain fields in order to protect information. We don't, for instance, pass crypt strings. So the mechanism is about keeping in sync with a record as a logical entity. It doesn't say is exactly the same as what is held. That's one part. The second part is that mechanisms like this are necessary if you have a contractual obligation for escrow. So you could imagine a GTLD having an RDAP requirement and then also having to supply escrow data to some location under contract. This is a mechanism that would permit that. It's not intended that a client is using this for query and republish, but it is the mechanism to guarantee public data is available elsewhere.
Okay.
Okay, if you export not exactly the same data, then there is a technical point. You need to have some way to flag the data as missing or redacted or modified, which is missing in the current draft.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Rick, last comment.
Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. GTLD escrow is covered by different mechanisms, as Jim Galvin certainly knows, than something that you'd use for RDAP. So from a GTLD use case, I'm having a hard time seeing it. I understand what you're saying about the use case that you have in here, though.
Good, thanks.
Okay. We'll move on to Mark's presentation, and I apologize, Mark. I only just realized we didn't get your slide up there. But if you can talk to it, and we'll get it loaded up and see where we are.
It's me to apologize because I didn't plan to have any slides, but while I was preparing the talk, I was actually doing, kind of slides. So I sent the slides to the chair, not a long time ago. Okay. So this draft was discussed as a kind of requirement within the ICANN RDAP pilot working group. The issue here is that domain thin registries do not have registrant data, and the registrars have. So RDAP query to a thin registry would have to provide a link in a sensor to a registrar RDAP server. So the question here is, how do I find the RDAP server URL of the registrar? So we need a mapping of a registrar ID to the RDAP server location. Since we already have an IANA registry for Bootstrap for the registries top-level domain, then the idea was to have an IANA registry for the mapping of registrar ID to their RDAP server locations. So one of the question is, what is the registrar ID? So I can, using IANA as a registry, which is not governed by IETF policies, which actually allocates a registrar ID, so a number, to any accredited ICANN registrar. So the question here is, we could use that number as the entry for example, the RDAP the JSON file that says registrar ID, here's the RDAP server location URL. Then the question is, do we have additional registrars that do not fit into this list? So that use case would be either a thin CTLD registrar running RDAP for that thin CCTLD and not selling any GTLD. So that was actually one question I sent to the RDAP, ICANN RDAP pilot working group, is this use case really exists? The other case could be, and I haven't dig into it and haven't talked to the RR, is there any use for this, for example, national or local internet registries? I don't know.
Slides.
Oh, thank you very much. So, if the answer is so I'm lazy. If we don't need that draft for that work, then we just get it out. So the question is, do we need additional registrar IDs, to allocate the registrar IDs in the case of these or other means? Then my proposal was to actually use the private enterprise number IANA registry, which essentially does just that. You could, within a day, get a number for your organization, and we can use that number for the registry we're talking about. The other thing is, then we would have like two number space, then we would have to add a prefix to identify the number space use. Next slide. The current proposal, I haven't put the JSON, and it's kind of a detail, but the current proposal is number space plus the registrar ID gives a list of RDAP server URL, and would be obviously in JSON as the other Bootstrap registries. Next slide. Comments received so far, ND. So why not use object tag RDAP thing, RFC? Frankly, I haven't looked at yet. My recollection of this draft was to manage the ARIN, the different IR, identifiers. So I was like, that's not the case. So we'll see. James talked about a different JSON format. I think we're not yet there. Let's define the thing before. Someone else said, why do we have an array of RDAP URL locations instead of just one? Implicitly having HTTPS will be simpler. I may have received other comments. So my first question is, do we need this? And especially the question I had about the use case before. If we don't need this, then I'm done. If we need this, please comment.
Okay, and so we'll take the two questions here, and then we got to move on to get the last two items in.
Yeah, Andy Newton. So did those comments go on the, not my comment, I know I sent it to the mailing list. Did those other comments on our mailing list or was it on some other forum?
I actually sent a direct email to James, please look at my draft, and he sent me. And the other was during an ICANN meeting, so.
Okay, I was wondering if I was losing messages. So, okay, so
You're losing your mind.
Entirely possible. So the object tag registry isn't about RARs. It was a formalization of something RARs have been doing, but it was actually an idea that Scott Hollenbeck had. So and last time I checked, he's not an RAR. So
you never told me that. You should have pointed.
It actually is broader than what it does. What you need to do, and it's a little bit more broader than that.
I'll look.
The other part of your draft, which I did comment on, was the algorithm you have, and that's the thing I actually object the most to.
Right, I was, yeah, sure.
This is Jim Gold from VeriSign. So this actual problem came up before ICANN volunteered to update their repository for registrars to include the RDAP URL, which in my opinion actually solves the problem. And this is really not just for thin registries, by the way. This is for all registries.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think if there are other repositories of registrar information, then yeah, I think this would be useful, but I don't see that at this point.
So in your mind, there's no other cases for registrars outside of the accredited list?
I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm saying if there is another repository that has registrars and IDs, that sort of thing, then this would be useful. But I don't know of any repositories.
That's my question.
Yes, I don't know of any.
So, Andy, did you just say that IANA is updating another registry with RDAP URLs?
Yeah.
I really don't like that either, because as an RDAP implementer, I want to go to one place in the IANA space, which is clearly the RDAP area. So if they're putting RDAP URLs and then they've been instructed by us to do that, I think that's wrong.
Okay, it is one place at IANA, but they're putting all the data in one place in IANA. But
there are separate bootstrap files there that are specifically what RDAP clients are supposed to deal with. And if they're not there, that's a problem.
Okay, so
well,
we're out. But to answer your question, this was a temporary solution until a draft officialize it. So if my draft is not the appropriate thing, then we can look at another way.
Well, maybe your draft should say, if you want to do this, here's the object tag.
Right.
Okay.
That's
all right. Don't go too far, Andy, because you're going to be up next to talk. We have two more comments. Gavin, please go ahead. Okay. And we let's have a remote comment.
Gavin Brown from Central Lake. So this registry isn't designed to be consumed by clients. It's designed to be consumed by servers, which is why it feels a bit weird. Because as a server operator, I need to know the URL of my registrar in order to construct a referral link. And the problem we have is that we're in the process of bootstrapping the whole system now, and every registrar has to tell every registry what its base URL is, and that if you multiply a number of registrars by number of registries, you end up with millions of emails going backwards and forwards. So the need was, well, let's how can we simplify this? IANA maintains a list of ICANN accredited registrar IDs. It's IANA maintains it, but it's actually populated from ICANN. So ICANN is saying, we'll add that as a parameter to that registry, and then registrars have a means of putting that into the registry, and it will then appear on the IANA registry for registries to consume. An RDAP client doesn't need this and will never consume this. But the idea, the purpose for this is constructing that link in the response from the RDAP server, the GTL, the RDAP server.
All right, I want to move to the remote participant here. Judy, go ahead.
Jody.
Oh, Jody. I'm sorry, I need glasses. Wow.
So I was just going to answer a question from Mark about registrars that sell CCTLDs but are not IANA accredited. There are hundreds of examples of those. Yeah, basically, what they do is they are accredited by the CCTLD, but they resell the GTLDs through another ICANN accredited registrar. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
And they are going to run RDAP servers. Hopefully. Thanks.
Okay. So Andy and Alex, you want to come up and sorry guys, give your 2 minutes to your last two work items.
Yeah, here I want to try to save you a little bit of time. There's been discussion about the J-card issues. This isn't necessarily my discussion. That's why there are no slides on this. And I'm going to send the notes I have, because I've been talking to various people, to the mailing list so we can have a discussion there. I think what I would like to get out of this is how many people actually think we need to do something about J-card, if you don't mind me asking the room. So raise your hand or hum or do whatever. Only 3 people? 4 people?
No, there's I see 5 hands, 6, 7, 8. I see 8 hands, 9.
Some people are reluctantly raising their hands. Okay, so I'll let you take that as input as to whether we should progress this discussion. But I'm going to send my notes to the mailing list.
Okay, that'd be good. I appreciate it. And Alex is going to talk about some other background discussions about registry and security log.
Okay, thanks for the 10 minutes. I think I need just like 30 seconds. So I floated the idea that we should look at whether we can do anything around the standardization of, depending on the registry, it's called security log, registry log, whatever, additional mechanism that prevent like modification of the delegation data of a domain name. And the most important information comes now. Yeah, we're going to have a side meeting on Wednesday at 2 p.m. in Room Paris. So the bad news is Room Paris has seats for 15 people. So, well, I mean, we have like 50 people now in the room, but if, well, let's do it. Can I give a quick show of hands who is planning to attend? Okay, it's definitely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, it's about 15 people now. So it's Wednesday at 2 p.m. in Room Paris. It's on the side meeting wiki, and I don't know. That's the point.
No, you can't remote attendance on the sign-up rooms.
But I promised to do a summary after the meeting, and I'm also not sure it fits entirely into Regext anyways, because there's like a ton of policy stuff and what level of security do we want and yada yada. So, but last point, I'm using more time than I thought I would. If you have something in your registry system that looks like security log or registry log, it would really be nice if you could like prepare to speak about it in 2 minutes, what it is. Yeah, so I plan to do it to the table. What are you doing? What's your level of security? And after that, I'm going to write the summary and see where we can go from there. So that's my plan. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the formed agenda. There's any other business item up there. And I put the slide up. That came up. I'll give Scott a moment here just to explain the slide.
Sure. Thank you. Scott Hollenbeck. As the slide says, we are doing another registration operations workshop in Bangkok on 9 May. If you're not familiar with what this series is, we really do like to focus on the work part here of workshop. This is not intended to be presentations where you're just kind of sitting there getting read to. We're looking for proposals for people who have topics that need some real discussion. And if you are, for example, a GTLD registry or registrar, you are, or at least you should be, in the midst of implementing RDAP right now. If you find things in the specs you don't like, guess what? You are a good candidate for submitting a proposal for a discussion or a panel. All right, so please, if you know you're going to be in Bangkok for one of those other events, you've got some good things to think about. We do have a call for proposals out. I would encourage you to get that in ASAP. I know the people who are coordinating this, and I can tell you right now, we do have room for more presentations. I'm sorry, discussion slots. Thank you.
May 9th actually fits precisely. It's the afternoon of the GDD Industry Summit. It's the last day of that, the afternoon. That's where this is. And then the DNS Symposium is the next day. So that's where May 9th fits in that overall co-located with. Last chance for any other business. Anybody? I'm not seeing any hands go up. No one is standing. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your being here. And so we're adjourned. Oh, blue sheets, of course. If anyone wants to get the blue sheets, they're up here. Make sure your name's on it.
She's got